Pilgrim Crow by Crispin Rodrigues. Rest here, Pilgrim Crow. Beyond lies an ocean for you to drink. The starlings claim to have seen everything, yet they squabble over the ocean's size. None of them have drunk from it, but having heard the wind, call it an ocean, they believe. Rest now, Pilgrim Crow. The ocean tastes like home, for the sky tastes the ocean daily. Some day you'll need to land and bury your claws in something solid. So why not sand? The ocean seeps its foam into sand. There is life among the sand wash. The crabs know only the ocean and can call it a place, but they already have homes in their shells. The fish know the ocean and land. Look at the twinkle in their eyes as they lie on the beach. The crow finally lands and takes a sip of the ocean and spits out its briny contents. From now on, you speak only in your familiar cry, tongue shriveled by the memory of salt. You take to the trees, where you must roost, for you must pass on the word of the ocean. Rest now, Pilgrim Crow, for the burden of the ocean is heavy, and the taste lingers. Okay, so in this poem, Crispin describes the journey of a crow, a solitary creature that is usually shunned for associations with death, right? To quench its thirst with seawater. Initially, at the start of the poem, we get a portrayal of a restless crow that is searching for something. After all, it is described as a pilgrim. The title itself, right, Pilgrim Crow, it's something that's wandering, something that isn't at home, and is looking for something. But what it's looking for, we still do not know from the start of the poem. So pilgrims are like wanderers, right? And during the journey, the pilgrim is suspended in somewhere between home and destination. So it has the time and space to reflect on spiritual matters like desire, what you truly desire in life. The crow, however, is not alone on this journey. Like throughout the poem, something that's striking is that it is accompanied by the speaker who reassures it that it is on the right path and that it will survive the journey. That's the refrain, rest now, pilgrim crow, as if the speaker is reassuring the crow that everything's gonna be fine, or perhaps it's the speaker speaking to himself and using the crow just as a metaphor for himself. Yeah. So something that you'll notice as I read the poem, right, is that there are comparisons made to other creatures. So, for example, in the second stanza, the speaker mentions starlings, right, who claim to have seen everything but still squabble over the ocean size. And they have not actually drunk from the ocean, but having heard the wind call it an ocean, they believe. So here the starlings are portrayed to be rather naive creatures whom the pilgrim crow should not be envious of. And also something interesting is that here the starlings, right, is described as a group. So when you compare this to the singular nature of the pilgrim crow, you get this, it heightens the feeling of solitude of the crow. Other creatures that are mentioned in the poem are like the crabs. So I don't know which stanza that is, but yeah, the crabs know only the ocean and can call it a place, but they already have homes in their shells. So here, again, crabs aren't creatures for that the crow has to be envious of because um, crabs not have to search for anything. They're like born into privilege, they don't have to search for home or rootedness. And so I think that time when I read this poem, right, it's the crab stanza and also the rationale Pilgrim Crow, the ocean tastes like home, for the sky tastes the ocean daily. That made me think, okay, so it's like the Pilgrim Crow searching for home, searching for rootedness. Um, but towards the end, that interpretation kind of changed. Yeah. So another creature that is mentioned in the poem is fish. So I think in the poem, right, the fish are the only creatures that the the crow is recommended to emulate, kind of, because the fish has seen both ocean and land. Um, it has experienced the safety of its home, but also gone on to like places, uncharted territory, right, land for it in its case. And having seen the land, there you can see like twinkle in their eyes. But the unfortunate fact is that fish cannot survive on land. So even though they've managed to experience something other than the safety of home, ultimately they aren't made to survive that. But when you compare it to the crow, right, the crow actually gets to experience, soaring the skies, just walking on land and drinking from the ocean. Yeah. During its flight, right, it is suggested that the crow needs to land, otherwise it will exhaust itself. So it's in like the, which stanza is that again? One, two, three, four, five. Someday you will need to land and bury your claws in something solid. So why not sand? So here, right, the modal you will need. It's as if it's compulsive. It has no choice. It has to do something. This sense of duty is also something that the idea of pilgrimage suggests, right? That there's something that it has to do. And also, I guess when I read the poem and I have the image of like a crow just soaring the skies, right? Obviously, it has to land eventually, otherwise it'll just exhaust itself. And also here, to go back to the idea of thirst, right? Um, is that it has to quench its thirst, and in this case, its only source of water is the ocean, seawater. And so the speaker suggests that the crow can just land on the beach and just drink from the sea. But yeah, so in attempting to assuage the crow's worries, right, that perhaps it's not used to drinking from the sea, for example, the speaker suggests that the ocean tastes like home and is thus not something to be feared. And I found this stanza so beautiful because, like, it just references the water cycle, right? So, yeah, it's just something I would never usually think of, that the ocean and the sky actually are so interlinked. Yeah. And so, yeah, so sure, like the ocean is unknown territory for the crow, but ultimately it's still part of nature, part of the water cycle. And so it's something that the crow has no reason to fear. But we also know that seawater is not the best way to quench one's thirst, right? So it seems that the crow just lacks all alternatives at the moment and really has no choice but to stop at the beach in order to quench its thirst. So I've talked about the sense of duty and compulsion in the idea of a pilgrimage. So I guess this is where it comes to me. Lah. But also, a pilgrimage is transformative, right? It's not just something people do because they have to do it. So, after having drunk from the sea and spitting out the sea's briny contents, which is very clearly a reference to tears shed by human beings, right, and grief and heartache. The crow ultimately returns to the trees where it roosts, with the tongue shriveled by the memory of salt. The burden of the ocean is heavy, and the taste lingers. So the crow ultimately still manages to return to a place of comfort, its natural habitat, but has gained an extraordinary experience that now allows it to carry the vast ocean within its little frame. So thirst in this poem, right, is natural and something we must all quench. And we may not find the right sources of water at every point in our life, but to quench our thirst by drinking is still to say, I want to continue living, no matter how bad the water may taste right now, no matter how uncomfortable I feel. So grief, similarly, is something almost everyone will experience, but there's no reason to fear it. Just like how the crow, an animal, a part of nature, has no reason to fear another part of nature, which is the ocean. The experience of any emotion enriches our life in its own way. And I think when we link back to the context of the collection from which the poem was taken, right, the the poems from this collection are very much about two divorcees who are trying to settle, who are trying to former divorcees, so they're like from different relationships lah. Then they're trying to build a life together. So when I read it, I'll interpret it as, just experiencing the heartbreak that has to come with a divorce, the certain relationships that are meant to fail, right? And it's just that these things are bound to happen. Okay, perhaps not divorce, but failed relationships are an inevitability in life. And so there's ultimately no reason to fear these kind of events, because at the end of the day, they'll still enrich you in some way and you'll still survive. Yeah. So I think that's all I have to say. So like at first, the interpretation of the pilgrimage, right, is like a search for home or rootedness, because I was going back to the divorce narrative, right? So like after divorce, you're trying to look for a new home, am I right? But then towards the end, because ultimately I realized that a pilgrimage isn't like searching for a final destination. It's going for a transformation and going back home ultimately. So to me, it's more of having to complete an experience, which in this case is the grief that follows divorce or heartbreak, in order to emerge stronger lah. Yeah. So that's all I have to say for this poem. What do you guys think?
You did mention about the poem about being about a crow who emerges stronger at the end of its journey, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't really think it's all that hopeful, especially when we consider the last two stanzas. So,
Mm-hmm.
when we take into consideration tongue shriveled by the memory of salt, and the burden of the ocean is heavy and the taste lingers. So, maybe even though the crow emerges out of this whole experience of tasting seawater a bit stronger in your words,
Mm-hmm.
there is still a lingering sort of um, pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's transformative, um, not in a fully positive way, but there
Yeah.
is still like some damage done to the
Uh-huh.
crow.
Yeah. I guess like not stronger as in you're in a much better place in your life, but as in you had a fuller experience because
Mm.
like you've experienced grief and you've let yourself experience that as opposed to just blocking out all the sadness in your life and just experiencing happiness, for example.
True, true.
Yeah. So like even the lingering wound is something that enriches your life somehow if you manage to survive lah. Yeah.
I think the idea of the ocean, like my interpretation of it was a bit different. Like when I first read it, I thought it was like something like the crow has to drink from to quench its thirst because it's like something it needs to survive. Then like it needs to go through this experience. So it doesn't have to be from the ocean, but from sources of water in general, right? Then the idea of the ocean is like a new experience that this creature or this uh, entity has to go through to survive. So this poem felt like the idea of immersing yourself in a new experience. Like you need to immerse yourself in this new experience to continue your existence.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I felt this poem was about. And yeah, and the idea of like this newness, I felt it was a bit seen throughout the poem because it's like, for example, the ocean tastes like home, for the sky tastes the ocean daily. So it feels like the speaker is trying to say that it's using similes to say that this actually feels similar to what you're familiar with, but it's slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
It's also similar idea when it's trying to relate it to other creatures like the crabs and the fish, and yeah, it seems like it seems like the speaker is trying to convince or like challenge the Pilgrim Crow to explore
Mm.
more things
Mm.
um, that is out of their usual experience.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I agree.
Just now, Girish, you mentioned something about the narrator of the poem kind of like coaxing or challenging the crow, right?
Yeah,
And I think this invites a lot of interesting questions. So, what comes to the top of my head is whether the thirst we're talking about here, whether that desire we're talking about here is internal or external. Does the crow come here to the sea to drink its water and roost because of the external forces coaxing it, because of fate, because of circumstance, or did it actually choose and exercise its own agency to drink in the ocean itself, right? And yeah, I mean, it's just a really poignant parallel to life itself.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the, the experiences that we go through, I mean, is it truly experiences that we choose to go through, or are they placed there in front of us by fate?
yeah. If to me, to me, it feels like it's an external thing at the start. Then like suddenly after the crow finally lands, then suddenly the personal pronoun changes to you, and then it's like because you went through this external experience, now suddenly you're like everyone else. You speak only in your familiar cry, tongue shriveled by the memory of salt. You take to the trees, you must roost, you must pass on. So it feels, I mean, in my impression, it feels like it changed from external to internal because this crow did what it was coaxed to do. That's the idea I get. Yeah.
But also, like, throughout the poem, the modals used are like will, you will need to, you must, right? So I think that goes back to the ambiguity of
Yeah.
agency that
True.
Jovan suggested. Yeah. Actually, right, you know when writers use the second person, what's it called again?
Second person?
The second person pronoun in like novels, for example, right? Do you think that gives the reader more agency or less agency?
And that
Like
question has so
you-
much weight.
Like you.
Like, you know those choose your own adventure stories?
Oh, V squares. Yeah.
Oh. I think it does give more agency.
Yeah. But it's like both, right? Because it's also telling you the only options you can choose. It's also restricting options, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
True.
I mean, it really depends on the context and the purpose of the text, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in RPGs, second person is usually used to just describe the circumstance that the player character is in. But you know, in poetry, sometimes the second person is more used more imperatively, such as in this poem.
Okay, next poem, Jovan.